Distinguished panelists, members joining in from Kenya and across the globe, good afternoon and welcome to the COVID-19 Preparing for Tourism Recovery. This is a webinar that is hosted by the Principal Secretary Tourism from the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife, Madam Safina Kwekwe. This afternoon, our esteemed panelists shall be engaging in discussions on the way forward for stakeholders who must work together in considering opportunities and strategies necessary in readiness for the reset of the travel and tourism industry. We can all look forward to conversations that shall offer insight on the current projections for resumption and return of travel and how that shall be achieved. We'll also be hearing about the possibilities relating to potential markets, travelers, products, and what the new normal in global travel will look like. While there's much that we may not be certain about, what we do know for sure is that change is well and truly underway, and we must all begin to work together on recovery, to be ready using all platforms and media available for existing and new markets as they begin to travel. My name is Sheila Mwaniga, and it is an absolute pleasure and honor to be your moderator for this webinar. Housekeeping rules for this session are fairly simple. Thank you to everyone who has registered and shared a question. The panelists shall be addressing those as the conversations progress, and we'd like to encourage you to continue sending more questions, which will be tackled in the question and answer session a little later in this discussion. Participants, you are requested to kind the Magical Kenya YouTube channel. And with that, may I now introduce our distinguished panel. Our host, who has served in various organizations and institutions, both in civil society and the public sector, is our first panelist. Notably, and most recently, she has served as a Principal Secretary for Gender in the Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender. She has also served in the East African community as a legislator in the Second East African Legislative Assembly and chaired the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Agriculture, Tourism and Natural Resources. Currently, she is the Principal Secretary of Tourism in the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. Welcome, Madam Safina Kwekwe Tsungu. Our next panelist has over 20 years of experience in business development and operationalizing strategies in both the private and public sector with acumen and expertise are demonstrated in her strategic yet practical approach to building successful businesses and brands. Please welcome the CEO of the Kenya Tourism Board, Dr. Betty Radier.
Thank you, Sheila, and welcome to everybody.
Our next panelist has extensive experience with tourism development, strategic planning, and digital marketing. He is a recognized expert in the field of tourism strategy, specializing in change management, including changes brought about by technology, market shift, and changing travel behavior. Karibu Sana, the founder and CEO of E-Tourism Frontiers, Damien Cook.
Honor and welcome everybody.
Also with us is a panelist with proven success in new organization setups, change management, financial planning, integrations, process improvement, company compliance, and responsible strategic leadership. With over 23 years experience in leadership and management, and an extensive knowledge and experience in the African business environment, he is currently the Group Managing Director and CEO of Kenya Airways. Welcome, Alan Kilavuka.
Thank you, Sheila, and welcome to everybody.
Also with us is a panelist who shall be addressing a good portion of many of the questions that we've received from you concerning aviation, transport, and infrastructure. He has served as Acting Director General of the Kenya Civil Aviation, as well as Acting Managing Director of the Kenya Airports Authority. He currently heads the Air Transport Division in the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Urban Development, and Public Works. Welcome, Deputy Director, Ministry of Transport, Nicholas Bodo.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sheila.
And joining us from London, our next panelist was responsible for the world travel market for 27 years and served both as managing director and ultimately as chairperson. She founded and is chair of the international water development charity Just a Drop, bringing sustainable, safe water sanitation and hygiene education to communities across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. She was awarded an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen for services to travel and tourism and is the current chair of the African Travel and Tourism Association. Welcome, Dame Fiona Jeffrey.
Jambo, and lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least is a panelist who for nearly 2 decades has helped some of the world's leading tech, media, and entertainment companies define their strategies, grow, and advance their footprint in emerging markets. From MTV Base, Warner Brothers, and Turner Broadcasting, he now serves as Google's Regional Director, Sub-Saharan Africa, Government Affairs, and Public Policy. Good afternoon and welcome, Charles Murito.
Thanks, Sheila, and welcome everyone.
And there you go. Those are our panelists for this afternoon's webinar. Once again, a very big thank you to all panelists for being here. And now I'd like to request the Principal Secretary for Tourism, Madam Kwekwe, for the opening remarks and welcome address.
Thank you, Sheila, and Jambo to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. This is a series of webinars that we've been holding for the tourism and travel sector. Knowing that we are in a time that is unprecedented, we have had good times in the past, but now we are in a time that is truly difficult for everybody in the sector. We have seen a decline in global travel because of closed airspaces. We have seen a decline in jobs. People are losing jobs to the tune of 100+ million. We are seeing a drop in the sector's contribution to the GDP. And we are gonna see more of this going forward until the world finally finds itself settles with the reality of COVID-19. However, we know that this is something that we have been alive to, and we've been discussing on how best we can be able to deal with it now, but also live post-COVID. And today's webinar is to prepare for recovery. And looking at the experience of Kenya, the current interventions, both by government and non-government actors, have been to see how we can lessen the burden on credit. We can increase cash flows to individuals and businesses, protect jobs, provide welfare schemes for those who are most vulnerable. And this, going forward, and others will be the measures that we anticipate to put in place so that we can be able to open up for business. Once again, Kenya as a destination is waiting, and we are waiting to come back stronger and more appropriately designed for the needs of our travelers. So I look forward to this webinar, and I hope that we will together forge our way forward as we prepare to recover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam PS. We are very grateful for this opportunity to interact. Speaking of interaction, we've got members who've logged in and joined in from as far as Barcelona, South Africa, Nigeria, France. Currently, we have more than 700 participants in this webinar. Now, picking up from what you have just spoken about, Madam PS, we are all dealing and grappling with the uncertainty of the times. We're all wondering, when can we go back to normal? You've spoken about job losses, and it is not it's not an easy time for everybody around the globe. And the question that everyone has on their minds right now is, will everything go back to normal? Can we hope and pray that we go back to normal? But what is that normal? Is it going to be what we're used to, or is it going to be different? This is a question that I now pose to Damien.
Thank you very much, Sheila. I think there's some slides. If we could put those up, guys, that would be great. So to answer that question, and that really is one of the most common questions we're hearing around the world, is can we just go back to normal? Will we go back to where we were in 2019 before this? Two most common questions, that and when will this happen? I mean, the good news is, and there is good news we're seeing out there about coming back, is that we're seeing some of those green shoots, some of those hopeful signs. Iceland has announced that it is opening for tourism next month. Greece following suit, but only to approved countries from the Schengen area in the case of Iceland. Emirates has announced they're commencing limited flights next week, but again, under very strict conditions. What people are looking for is the light at the end of a tunnel, that expression. But here's the thing about tunnels that we have to remember. Where you come out of a tunnel is not where you went into a tunnel. We're going to come out in a new place. So while tourism is definitely going to come back, it is not going to come back the way that it was before. Now, many people ask why. Why can't we just go back to 2019? The same markets, the same channels, the same way we sold tourism. There's a reason behind this that I've seen from working with lots of destinations at a strategic level, something that we really need to grasp and understand. Previous crises we've faced in the tourism sector have been events. 9/11 was an event. In Kenya, Westgate was an event. The tsunami in the Indian Ocean was an event. This is not an event. This is a phenomenon. And the things that phenomenons do is change life for everybody on Earth. The internet was a phenomenon. Think how much that's changed everyday life. And because this has affected every person and every country on the globe, it's a global phenomenon. And that's created an existential threat to travel the way that it was before. We need to understand that we're not going to be able to tell you when there's an ending to this. The day will not come when Corona is gone and travel resumes. There's going to be a phased series of returns to travel as restrictions are lifted and as new markets become viable. And that will be defined largely by science. And this is one of the only times we've seen science define policy and changing travel behavior. So can't we just get over it and go back to the way travel was? No. Think about what happened after 9/11. What we became accustomed to in terms of the travel process, the additional security and travel changes and how we adapted to that. And this is the same. In terms of understanding how it's going to change tourism, as a tourism consultant, there was one thing I talked about more than anything over the last 2 years and right up till January of this year, and that was over tourism. That was the hot topic in tourism. There were destinations receiving too many tourists and we were seeing a negative impact from that. Well, within a month, we went from over tourists to no tourists. But what we can't deny is those two things were connected. If we look at the countries that were most impacted by over tourism, who were they? Spain, France, Italy, and most of the travel public we saw growing was from China. A lot of those popular travel cities, Barcelona, New York, other cities, what's the connection that we see? These have become the epicenters for this virus. Travel became a vector for delivery of this virus. And the mass tourism model was one of the key drivers of that. We all know that every inch of legroom on a plane become part of a profit margin as we packed more and more passengers into planes, more and more passengers processed through airports, more and more people packed into mega hotels, eating from common buffets, filling every seat of a tour bus. And what we did was create a machine for tourism that worked at a mass tourism level, but also a machine for delivery of a virus. And that is how we saw it spread, and travel did play a key role in that. And the machine of tourism became a vector for infection. And effectively, tourism became a malfunctioning machine. And what we have to do is what we do when all of our machines and computers malfunction: turn it off and restart it. And that's where we are right now. The machinery of tourism has been stopped so we can reset. But we need to understand that we are not going to go back to where we were in 2019. We're starting to learn that maybe the virus is more widespread than we thought it was, and the mortality rate may be lower. But we can't deny that if it had been more deadly, and if the next one we see is more deadly and can infect more people, that this system that delivered it needs to be reformed and needs to change. Resilience in travel, the need for hygiene, the need for a return of sanity in terms of the volume of tourists that we deal with is going to be critical. And we're going to see laws enforce that. We're already seeing bilateral tourism start to emerge. Australia and New Zealand signing an agreement to send tourists only to each other. The Schengen countries agreeing to send countries within the Eurozone and to Iceland, as we've seen. We're going to see more of that policy-driven tourism. Now, those policies and those masks we see people wearing, those perspex screens people are talking about may not endure, but neither will mass tourism. The reality is that new normal is here, and every destination, including Kenya, is now a startup. We're at a startup level of rebuilding tourism. Can we have the next slide, please? So what we're seeing is an acceleration of change. And this pandemic is doing this in all business sectors. As the economist said, we're seeing changes that already existed being accelerated. People are saying cinemas may never come back again. That's being driven by streaming entertainment. This is now, that trend was there last year. And the same is there in travel and tourism. There were changes that existed last year in travel that are being accelerated. Last year was one of our highest volume years for tourism, 2019, but it was the year where Thomas Cook went bankrupt. There were changes in travel behavior we saw last year that this pandemic will accelerate. Right. Someone could mute their microphone there, we're getting a lot of sound. The changes we saw last year being driven by millennials were away from mass tourism, away from commoditized travel into more independent travel, and more environmentally conscious and aware travel. And we're starting to see them evolve through this pandemic. So when we're looking at our first wave of travelers that we're going to see, we need to understand that our domestic markets, as Betty will talk about, our regional markets are critical as our first wave of travelers, but also with an increased cost of traveling as a result of all of those new normals in travel and the costs of processing travelers and flying, we're going to see a higher spending traveler emerge as well, and less of them. We'll see better informed travelers who are spending more on their travel experiences. And the reality is they're not going to arrive on cruise ships and they're not going to arrive in charter planes. They're not going to be driven by those old volume driven models. It's predicted we're not going to see travel at a volume that we saw last year until 2023. Can those mass market businesses sustain with our clients for another 3 years? It's highly doubtful they can. And also, will the market still be there for them? As you may have seen in the news yesterday, that the Seychelles have already declared that they don't want the cruise market back for at least another 2 years because of the threat that it presents. So what we're seeing is a real opportunity for our travel sector. And it's quite an exciting opportunity because this is probably one of the only cases where the smaller and more local your travel business, such as a boutique hotel or a bespoke tour operator, the more likely you are to be able to sustain and survive with less higher paying customers. That mass market model is very doubtful if it's going to return. So we're seeing travelers who will be looking for more personal and purpose-driven travel, expressing their social concerns in their travel, and spending more as they travel. We're entering a low-volume, high-yield market. Next slide, please. As the head of IATA recently said when he addressed the industry, cheap travel is over. The mass market really is going to struggle in this in this environment. And as we develop strategies, we need to identify that new travel market, lower volumes, higher value travel. And that's how we need to start planning strategically. So to wrap up, as we head towards strategy planning, next slide, please. The approach, previous slide, please. The approach that I'm taking working with multiple destinations is a 3-phase approach. How we react to this current situation in terms of how we keep our industry and travelers informed, how we take this period of cessation to rethink and re-strategize our travel markets, and how that moves us into recovery. So as we use these phases to guide our conversation today, let's just start with that reaction point. Next slide, please. We need to be sure that our trade, and we've seen the questions that have come in today, as well as our travel partners around the world and potential travelers are well informed. And what they want to know is, when can they travel to Kenya? How can they travel to Kenya? And what will our new normal be? Next slide, please. So that means developing resources that can show us the phases that we're going to go through. And that has to be based in science. As we see destinations start announcing their 5-phase plans for recovery, the first step is establishing not getting rid of the virus, but the ability for a country to manage the virus. Our capacity for hospital beds, for ventilators, for PPEs. We need to know that if this is going to spread, that we can manage it. And that is the first step destinations face as they start to plan resumption of travel. Next slide, please. The next thing is the lifting of local restrictions and social restrictions so that they actually start identifying transport being open and accessible, businesses, restaurants and hotels being open and accessible, and also that these service delivery requirements for those businesses are in place. Can we get food out to our hotels? Do we have the systems in place to support tourism? And from there, we can start to develop a five-phase plan to actually take us towards recovery. Next slide, please. And from that, that's where our marketing approach has to come. We start to use that model to build that demand for travel, and then we deliver on it. And we should be allocating percentages of our budgets to reaching those right targeted markets, those higher value travelers, as the destination becomes open and accessible to them. So starting with domestic, regional, and then looking at those high value international travelers and making sure that we target the right travelers that will be traveling, that will have the financial wherewithal to travel, and the interest and desire to visit the amazing experiences we offer. But I see this, as challenging as it is, as a real opportunity for us to reset and rethink Kenya tourism. And that's where I hope this conversation will take us. Thanks very much, Sheila.
Thank you very much, Damien. Thank you for the insights you've just shared. This is not an event, it is a phenomenon. And it's very difficult to place a timeline on a phenomenon, but we all can't help but do so anyway. And speaking about timelines, I would now like to direct the next question to Dr. Radir. When it comes to Kenya's recovery plan, what does that timeline look like?
Thanks, Sheila, and thank you, Damien, for that opening and the PS. I think the first thing that we need to do as a group of people, or as a body of people in tourism, is to be aware. And awareness is important because we need to be looking at the steps to recovery. And in looking at the steps to recovery, there's already some indicators that will show you that a destination or the world is moving towards recovery. And we've listed these down as about 5 items. The first thing is the ease around restriction and the clear protocols around how people will travel. Because what that does is it immediately begins to guide people. As you will note, throughout the pandemic, people are looking clearly, will stay at home. So there was the guidance that stay at home so you can travel tomorrow. What's the next steps? As we open up, what are the protocols? That will be the next step to start to tell us, okay, we're moving towards getting back into business. Then there'll be the resumption of domestic travel. The reason this is because it seems it is the most latent market for everybody in the globe. You must start with what you have in your hand. These are the people that you have resident in the place where you are. This overcomes the number of restrictions around closed borders, difficulty in air travel, and a traveler that's quite sensitive in terms of how they want to travel, how comfortable they are about traveling, how sensitive they are to hygiene, how destinations prepare themselves in terms of health, in terms of adhering to those protocols, and that determines how it is that markets open. Then thirdly, there's the issue around flights. And it's not just flights, it's access. It's flights, it's rail, it's road, it's cruise, as Damien mentioned. It's anything that moves people from one place to another. The challenge is the easier the access in terms of how far that access can take you, say, a long-haul flight, the more challenging the protocols. And therefore, that affects the decisions that people make around travel. Then there's, of course, the issue about quarantine, which now has become a way of life. You're talking 14 days and 14 days if you're coming from another continent. If you look at domestic, which is what we see is the basis of how we can open up this market, you can very easily overcome that because you can put in some concessions around that says, aside from the 14 days, which when combined becomes a 28-day quarantine on both sides, you may want, it may have a bit of ease around domestic and regional travel. And then lastly, there's the resumption of people feeling confident and ready to travel. The next phase will be around who is delivering for all of the protocols that are in place. These are our partners, and the partners become pivotal in that the point around opening up as a restart means that the people that deliver and own the product have to be in the same space to be able to meet this new traveler at their point of need. So the moment of truth comes when the traveler looks, books, moves, and starts to go to the place that they have elected to go, and they're coming to the destination. How ready is the trade? How ready are we to receive them with all of the protocols that are in place? How ready are we receive them to receive them with the diversity around the products that we now have in place, products that make people a lot more comfortable? The point that Damien makes about mass travel is over. What does that mean? Does that mean that when I come into your property or I come into the experience for the destination, I need to feel that there's enough room and safety around that experience? right? So the experiences have to be packaged in such a way that they begin to appeal to the concerns that this new traveler has. The conversation around markets becomes the next consideration, because you want to keep, even in the interim, you want to keep the markets engaged as a destination, because all of this is fluid at the moment. We know it will come, we can't say when. What we need to look at is the triggers and the signs of it, and begin to take full advantage of it. What we know at the moment is that we have a captive audience that's sitting at home. So as a destination, there's opportunities to start to get people through that dreaming phase, to start getting people to understand what is this destination they're going to go to, because people have time. They are being very particular about what they will and will not do. So it is to put yourself out there. You now have an audience that is watching, sifting through, reviewing, dreaming, and putting in place and ticking what their parameters for travel are. As a destination, you want to be front and center of that. So things like virtual streaming, being able to share information, being able to show not only information about experiences in our sector, but to embrace the whole aspect of what the destination is doing in terms of being ready to come back post-COVID, being ready to understand how it is that those travelers will feel safe. And then lastly, there's the conversation around how is it that we, during this period, can ensure that we continue to engage, because people don't like vacuums. They want to be able to know that you were there along with us. So we walked through this journey together. That will be important for us. So in terms of when, those are the considerations for when. Most of the other panelists will speak to the other aspects that go into the value chain before we come to the strategy. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you very much for those insights, Dr. Radier. It's a wonderful conversation that is unfolding as we watch and as we listen. A lot of people around the world had decided 2020 was the year for travel. This was their when to travel, but that has to change slightly. And now I'd like us to retrain our sights just a little bit and focus on the how to travel. If the when isn't necessarily happening right now, let's begin to build a plan with the how. And for my next question, I would like to direct this to the CEO of Kenya Airways. What is the impact of aviation and the future of air travel? We all love to jet on a plane and go to fabulous destinations, but that has a big question mark right now. So what happens next?
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. So I have there, she's trying to help me to kind of guesstimate, like everybody else, how the future of air travel is going to look like. So I shared with you some pictures there of we call it the aviation style and fashion for this year and beyond, which is full of, gowns, face masks, and shields and all these things. But let me take one step back, and then I'll try and guess how the future of aviation is going to look like. Right. First is to say 51%, we think that 51% of our market disappeared, or it's going to disappear between now and end of December. So 51%. And actually, I think that's very optimistic. So we say between 51% to 76% of our market is going to disappear between now and December. You have to remember that Kenya Airways in particular, if you look at our traveling public, we have about between 55 and 60% of them are traveling for leisure, so contributing to the tourism value chain. So then we say that a large portion of that is not going to be traveling. And in fact, what we think and what most people think is that most of the other people who will travel first will be business travelers. So we expect an increase in travel at the beginning and then a slump thereafter, because most people will be going either back home or traveling for business and the other way. So that is to say the obvious that between now and December, we will have diminished travel public. And that's seen across the value chain, like I said. Now, we had I'm part of IATA Board of Governors, so we had a board meeting on Monday. And I should share some of the discussions that we had in that board meeting, because the board meeting is composed of CEOs of major airlines across the world. And myself and ET represent Africa. And one of the things that we were discussing is, of course, what is the protocol of travel in airlines? And we know that if you look at it from end-to-end travel, it's not just what's important, what happens in the plane, but what actually happens from the point that you leave your home, to the point that you arrive at your destination. We have significant concerns around how that's going to look like. First of all, because this kind of protocol needs to be standardized as much as possible. And what we are going to propose as IATA is that we have a standardized, agreed standardized reducible minimums of hygiene when it comes to travel. And we haven't agreed what those minimum reducible are, but we know that countries like India have already implemented their standardized process. So we want to piggyback on those. Some of them are obvious. So for example, in future, you'll be required, for example, to have masks. I think those are kind of obvious ones. The increased sanitization of aircraft and making sure that there is availability of gloves, sanitization, and those kinds of things on board. Now, the biggest controversy is what we call neutralizing the middle seat, so that to increase social distancing between travelers. That was a big discussion during our IATA discussion on Monday. And the reason why it was a big discussion is simply that it is not economically viable for airlines to neutralize the middle seat. In any case, the argument is if you neutralize the middle seat, the distance between the window seat and the aisle seat is still not sufficient enough by recommended WHO standards. So in doing so, I mean, it's more psychological than anything else. But the bigger discussion, though, is that by doing that, you're reducing the what we call the load factor, or the number of people traveling, to about 62%, if you look at across the different types of aircraft. And that will mean that you will have to increase the cost per unit, or the cost of travel, by between 50%, depending on the type of aircraft, to 100%. So not only are you having less people travel, the cost of travel significantly goes up. Otherwise, it's absolutely not viable to fly this aircraft. So therein lies the issue of how do you, on the one hand, promote travel, but on the other hand, help to promote the hygiene of travel and also increase the confidence that people have in traveling in your aircraft. In fact, one of the biggest points that we all need to agree is, both as airlines and other modes of transport, airports, and even hotels and restaurants, is we first of all need to inspire confidence, not just amongst our passengers and guests, but first of all, confidence among ourselves. We have to all agree on what are the irreducible minimums. And unfortunately, because this is an ecosystem, I mean, we can't just sit here in Nairobi, in Kenya, and say, we'll do it in our airports and in our aircraft and in our hotels. We need to make sure that this particular protocol is observed across the supply chain, end to end. So those are key things. I think inspiring confidence among our traveling public, inspiring confidence amongst ourselves, and then having governments to be clear on when they will open up. And I know this is a very difficult one for governments, because it's one thing, being clear about the protocol of travel, but quite another, because this is a new virus, to determine when exactly we're going to open up. I know one of the questions that people keep asking me is when we're going to start flying. And all I can tell you is as soon as it's safe to do so. And I don't know when that is. I know we have a plan, for example, that we're opening up in June, sometime in June, based on the notice to airmen that was issued by a regulator. But I cannot say for sure, for certain, that that's when we're going to start flying, because originally we were supposed to start flying beginning of May, and then it was mid of May, and then in the end, We don't know, probably mid of June at the moment. But the point is, it keeps moving based on the opening up of the airspace, not just in Kenya, but in other destinations that we go to. But like everybody else has said, is we are going to start local, we're going to start smaller, and it's going to be incremental as we go, as we gain confidence in this new process, as passengers also gain confidence in air travel. But indeed, I will confirm that at least in the beginning, travel is not going to be cheap. We as a tourism industry, we will need to decide how we want to treat that and which people we want to attract based on the comments that have been made earlier by Damon. So I'll stop there, and we will keep engaging and seeing what kind of questions, responses that people have.
Thank you very much. The CEO of Kenya Airways, Alan Kilabuka. Thank you for those insights. Travel will not be cheap. That is a take home that we all must accept. But what does this mean for tourism as a whole? Because if traveling and the frequency of traveling will not be accessible to all of us like it has been, what does this mean for the tourism industry? And I'd like to request Madam PS to kindly address this question. What is the way forward in light of all these statistics and insights that have been shared? What does this mean for tourism as a whole?
Thank you, Sheila. And I want to say that, yes, indeed, it looks like it's all gloom, but it's not all gloom per se. Because as we say, we know where our launching pad is in domestic tourism. And from from the research and from the experiences is that many of the domestic tourists, that is in-country tourists, by and large travel by road. And for those going to the coast, by train. And therefore, we want to make this better and more comfortable and enjoyable for our domestic market. But again, the next is to open up other regions that have not been as popular as the parks and the coast, so that we also expose Kenyans to what is in stock for them to enjoy. And beyond Kenya, we are looking at our immediate neighbors, and we're looking at, for example, Uganda and Rwanda, because these are like-minded, if I may use that word. So we want to leverage on domestic and, of course, tourism, but we know also we will be pursuing more of bilateral tourism arrangements with other countries, and particularly those that were not ordinarily our markets, but we foresee potential in them. Indeed, travel will be more regulated. We will also have to work on redefining and repackaging our products and attractions to fit the new traveler, because a new traveler now is not going to be the 60-plus-year-old. It's not gonna be the people who, we don't have the peaks and the low season anymore. It won't be like a Christmas and Easter for us. So we would want to see how we can, with the industry, of course, work towards making our attractions attractive to a wider range of demographics. And of course, we want to be aware that our success will really depend on the strategies that we put in place for our rebound. So that is the future of us, of our tourism. We will have more policies globally will dictate how our local tourism industry will respond and will behave, particularly for international travelers, but also in-house, in country. We will see more and more of facilities and investors investing in out of the norm facilities and attractions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam PS. Addressing bilateral agreements and more regulated travel policies, the ways that we have been accustomed to travel will definitely change. But that is life. It's all about embracing the change and moving forward. Now, we train our focus to where our priorities will lie going forward, especially as Kenya, as a tourism destination. And I'd like to ask the next question to Dr. Betty Radir. How is Kenya strategizing for recovery in light of all that we've heard so far?
Thanks, Sheila. I think most of the panelists have painted the picture. So in developing a strategy, as we all know, what we must understand is identifying or finding our first travelers. And the first traveler will be there. The question is, will we be ready for them? And that is really the strategy. Because the first traveler now is completely different. I mentioned earlier that we must not approach the market looking at a rear view mirror. We must look forward. And the forward is dictated every day by the way the virus is panning out, how people are exposed to different scenarios within the virus. And that will dictate who your traveler is. So in developing the strategy, we must be clear about the different segments and sub-segments and sub-segments of who this traveler will be. And as a destination, we must gear ourselves up and prepare specific experiences and offerings and products that address all of those sub-segments because they're important for you. We've talked about domestic. Domestic will not be a homogeneous mass of people that are moving in one direction. They will have exactly the same levels of segmentation. They may be less sensitive because they are within an environment that they're now used to, but they will still have expectations and different requirements even as they travel. As the PS said, we have the benefit of having a number of different ways of getting around. And depending on the level of exposure that traveler feels, the minute somebody thinks I'm going to be moving using, say, an airline or a train or a bus, their mindset shifts. And therefore, even as we plan the products and where they are and how we want people to move around, we must be sensitive to that so that you're making the decision very easy. That's the first part of the strategy. The second part of the strategy is to close the gap about what are the concerns that they will have. Largely, there will be health concerns and protocol concerns and readiness concerns. And those you can very quickly showcase and put in front of that potential traveler. So they're seeing this as opposed to hearing that we are ready, they can see it and you can showcase this to them. So they're actually seeing it. And then thirdly, there'll be the sorts of characters of this travel. There's some travelers that are independent and will come back very quickly. Then there's the ones that are sort of inspired and tend to want to try new things. And therefore, as a destination, we must be ready for offerings that are 2-day offerings, 3-day offerings, 1-week offerings, half-an-hour offerings, and all those begin to open up our market. Once we go through that strategy, we have to then understand that we will move on from domestic, go on to regional, go on to continent-wide, and then go on to global. And as we move through those phases, because those will be our phases, and they will be phases that we need to go through to be able to get into full recovery. We must be, as mentioned by the panelists before, a destination that is post-COVID ready. So we must be able to very quickly communicate how it is that we're ready and move over that and get back to the core of our business, which is offering diversity that is compelling for people to want to make the decision to come to the destination. The review of the tourism products is a partnership between ourselves and our providers, our stakeholders, the people that actually carry this industry, the people that make this possible. And it's across different partnerships. There's the industry providers, there's the partners that move our potential travelers through different channels. Those are in transport and aviation. There's people who are in the health sector now that have become at the heart of whether a traveler makes a decision or not. Then the conversation around we must be able to revive the industry. And therefore, driving domestic becomes our number one strategy. We will focus on it. We'll make sure that we are making it easy for you to make that decision. But also we will make it in such a way that you have an offering wherever you are. People tend to veer or venture to what they feel comfortable, which is the immediate surrounding, and then open up as they begin to understand that this is actually possible. So it's a mindset and a perception that happens with people, and then you get them to embrace what it is that you're offering. This we must do with all our partners across the value chain, because what we do is we sell a promise, and we must make sure that all of the people that deliver that promise are at the same level and are ready to receive this traveler. So those are the strategies that we have to put in place in the immediate term. As we go on, like I said, every day is a different day. We have to continue to look at that strategy, because you will not have a strategy that says, I have a quarter strategy. That went with the beginning of COVID. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adair. The first traveler is a different traveler. And no longer shall we be looking at travel in terms of low season, high season, it's Christmas, it's Easter. Everything has changed, and we'd all better get that memo, read it, and action ASAP. But as we think about this new dynamic, we understand that there shall be new requirements, there shall be new expectations, and I'd like to request the Deputy Director from the Ministry of Transport to chime in here. What can we do to create infrastructural resources for these new markets, for this new normal? What mitigations, what incentives, what can we expect in travel and aviation going forward?
First of all, let me say this. ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, is already working towards coming up with standards towards travel under COVID. Alan talked about the cost of travel. Most people are thinking about the cost, but not the amount of time it will take you even to just do the simple thing as check-in. If you think about it, if we have social distancing as you are entering a terminal, social distancing as you check in, social distancing in the hold room, we are now talking about, it wouldn't be you check in 2 hours or 3 hours ahead of time. We most likely have 4 hours ahead of time. Even disembarking off a plane is something that will not be a rush to get out as we normally tend to practice. It will be an orderly way so that everyone feels safe, there is social distancing, and that is what we need to get through to ourselves. We need to accept that travel will not be the same again for a bit of time. If you look at it, some destinations, I saw on Twitter, somebody tweeting that they were on an 8-hour flight somewhere and they had to go through the test. So they were put somewhere to sit for 8 hours waiting for the result. Is that the new norm? And we may talk about some of it will be easier, like road. You know who you're traveling with, it's your family members, and you can contain yourself. Rail is a little bit easier because if you look at the railway stations, they tend to have quite a bit of room. Airport infrastructure is not something that you can change overnight. So for the travelers, both domestic and international, it is going to be a challenge because it will take quite a bit of time to get on board and to get off. The question has been raised about when are we going to open up. I think that can only be answered at a different level by the National Emergency Response Committee. Fortunately, we are already planning. KAA were meant to have a Zoom meeting to discuss what would be the new norm. Unfortunately, it was leaked all over social media, and everyone thought, hey, they're opening the airspace pretty soon. But like I said in the beginning, with ICAO working towards that, Alan mentioned IATA working towards figuring out what is the new norm in travel, especially for aviation. Because if you look at it, domestic is easy. You can either use the train or drive. Many nowadays prefer flying because of the amount of time it takes to get to your destination. But that one is easy. You have somebody on an 8-hour flight. Do you come in for tourism? Do you tell them that they need to be quarantined for 5 days? Is that the new norm? Or 14 days? Then why are they coming all this way? So some of these protocols will have to be reviewed so that at the end of the day, we encourage people to travel to Kenya as a destination in a safe manner that is good for them and works for us. After all, we don't want this thing to spread all over. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. And just before I introduce our next panelist, and to echo a lot of what you've just said, we are joined on the webinar by the chair of the Kenya Tourism Board, Jimmy Kariuki. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here with us this afternoon, sir. And he did post a comment to just follow up on what Mr. Bodo has shared. And Jimmy said, welcoming back international travelers to Kenya is very highly unlikely to happen this year. Governments are encouraging their citizens to holiday at home, and if they need to holiday out of the country, to go to a neighboring country that has safe travel measures in place. Furthermore, WHO has said that COVID-19 will be with us forever, which is not a very good piece of news for certain sectors like tourism. The focus has to be on the domestic and regional markets once restrictions are eased and airspace opened up. But even these markets won't be booming, as many people would have been hit hard financially by COVID-19. Many will have the willingness to travel, but sadly, equally as many will just not have the means to do so. It is a new reality. I think there's some truth to an age-old saying that says, if you can do something now, do it now. And that definitely applied to travel. If we could have traveled then, we should have traveled then, because now we find ourselves in a new normal. But in light of the conversations that have been shared, when you think about infrastructure, when you think about opening up domestic markets, when you think about the first traveler, the new markets that have been mentioned by many of our panelists, you cannot leave behind the issue that is tech. Tech is in all of our lives right now. We cannot separate ourselves from it. And I'd now like to address the next question to Charles. And Charles, this concerns tech support. That we find ourselves in. How will tech support home bandwidth demands? And what is the place for digital platforms in tourism marketing?
Thank you, Sheila, for that question. I think one of the things, as you mentioned, is that we cannot ignore the power of technology, especially in the age that we now live in. Just the simple fact that we're all on this webinar right now on Zoom, I wish it was on Meet, but I will settle for Zoom for now, is really testament of the power of technology and how the world has shifted in such that we're now completely comfortable in terms of holding an 800+ person meeting virtually. And when you look at even people working from home, it's the same situation. A lot more companies are really flexible in terms of being able to get their people to work from home. And that's going to consistently stay the same. Going forward, you will see more and more employers will be flexible. They will not insist on people having to go into the office every single day. And that will actually have some impact in terms of how people travel and how people engage with their work. Because in essence, you could be away from your office and still be able to hold meetings and engage virtually. So I think that technology is actually going to be a good thing around travel and tourism. I think I would be remiss to not mention the power of virtual reality and virtual tourism. As you know, in Kenya, we already have mapped over 22 national parks and reserves on Street View, and you can be able to go on that and be able to visit all of those national parks. You have heritage sites such as the National Museums of Kenya, etc., who are already with virtual sites which you can go visit. So I think when you're thinking about tourism going forward, you need to really double down on both the virtual elements of tourism and sites, because that's going to be a critical component to appealing to people to actually visit, and then the real actual sites that you want people to visit. We mentioned a lot about the fact that people need to be comfortable. And going forward, something that will be more important than ever before is going to be that notion of comfort and trust. And there's nothing more important in terms of trust and comfort like being able to be familiar with where you're going. That's why maps and Street View and other virtual sites become so critical. So I really encourage all the tour operators, all the boutique hotels, and other people on this call to really think about the digital strategy and how they engage and put their businesses online. Think about it this way, in sort of traditional CPG mentality. If you don't have your product on the shelf of a supermarket, customers cannot be able to purchase that product, even if they want. They will go for the next best thing. And that's really what's going to happen when it comes to tourism. If you're not online, if you do not have that virtual reality presence, people shall not be able to find you. So it's critical for you to really think about that digital strategy going forward more than ever before.
Okay, just before we conclude with your presentation, I've got one more question for you, Charles, and this concerns partnerships and innovation, because you cannot have a conversation about tech and not bear in mind that innovation is a pillar, it is a founding cornerstone. So what partnerships and innovation do you think will drive recovery?
There's several pieces of partnerships and innovation that we need to think about. One is that element of actually partnering with digital content creators to be able to put your content online and be able to showcase what you're trying to sell to that visitor. There's some really interesting statistics that we've seen literally over the last couple of weeks, because as Google, we've been conducting some research just to understand what is the sentiment of travelers when it comes to post-COVID crisis travel situation. And what's interesting is that almost 50% of the people that we interviewed, and we did this across multiple countries, said that they will be feeling comfortable to start looking at travel over the next 6 months or so to actually start booking. So I think it's important when you're thinking about partnerships to also think about who are you targeting, to really understand your client, and then how do you reach them? And that's where digital marketing becomes a really critical piece of your partnership strategy going forward. And in that sense, just delving a little bit on digital strategy and marketing, it's really thinking about how do you consistently maintain some level of engagement with your customers right now during the COVID crisis period, and then how do you shift that messaging post-COVID? Because those are two critical things. We've seen some fantastic campaigns that have been run by organizations such as Visit Dubai or Visit Singapore, where they're talking about, we'll be here for you post the crisis. So I think the DMOs, the small businesses, the hotels, etc., need to really think about that piece of how are they continuing to maintain their connection with their audience right now, because you don't want to be forgotten. And then how do you now start re-engaging with that customer post the crisis?
Okay, thank you very much for those insights, Charles. We are truly grateful. There are a few questions that have come through for you to address, which we will be sharing with you a little later in the question and answer section. But I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mohammed Hersi. He is joining us on this webinar, and you have posted a question for Dr. Radir, which I will be sharing with her, and she will be answering your question a little later. But as always, it's wonderful to know that you are here with us and walking the good walk. Now, if there's one question that has come through from a huge majority of participants in this webinar, it's a question that concerns the traditional operators, the role of the traditional operators and models such as trade shows. Are we going to continue with trade shows in the future? What happens to events such as MICE? Where do we stand with that? And to address this question, knowing how international markets will change, predicting, thinking, strategizing, and planning for that recovery is Dame Fiona Jeffrey. Thank you for being here with us. Kindly let us know what is the role going forward for traditional operators and models such as trade shows.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. The role of tour operators and travel agents continues, in our view, to be a really, really important one. You know, the UK market, and I can talk a little bit about the international market, because I always believe that some good can come out of bad. And from an international perspective, there are opportunities, I think, that as an industry we need to take advantage of. But to focus specifically on the tour operators and the travel agents, in the UK, they have played an enormous role because we're going through a period of consumer lack of confidence in our industry at this point in time. And that's not just about fear of travel. It's actually how secure is our travel experience if we make a booking? And there is legislative law through the European Union Travel Package Directive, which entitles by law consumers of travel experiences to be entitled to a full refund if their holidays are cancelled. And obviously that's put our industry into some substantive disarray because the consumer is entitled to a refund, and they're entitled to that refund within 14 days. Clearly, that puts businesses, particularly the airlines, into a really challenging position. And when you've got staff that are furloughed, and then the processes have to be fulfilled by reductions in staff availability, then it creates this general anxiety and concern as to how our industry is effectively functioning, properly. So the role of the travel agent and the tour operator is paramount in reassuring and giving confidence to the traveller that, and we're seeing a support and desire by customers to book with trusted, valued, experienced tour operators and travel agents. So that functionality is absolutely key in our view. Addressing the issue of trade shows, I think they will continue to play a significant marketing and communications role. I recall when I was running World Travel Market during the 9/11 crisis. And at that point, the industry globally really expected me to cancel World Travel Market that year. But I took the view, as did my team, that if the industry wasn't prepared to, psychologically get on a flight and fly again, then how could they expect their customers to? And so the show absolutely went ahead. It went ahead 6 weeks later. It didn't have the same numbers as you would expect, but there was a substantive international attendance. And one of the key outcomes of that experience was actually the opportunity that was created to bring the industry, our global industry, back together again. And you could really feel the confidence rebuilding in our industry in the halls over that 4-day period. So people were able to connect, they were able to share their challenges and their problems, they shared potential solutions. It's probably one of the most significant world travel markets I ever ran, and not because it was commercially the most successful, because it wasn't, but it was absolutely needed and wanted, and the industry benefited from that. And I don't think that has changed given this pandemic. There has to be the right situations for trade events to take place. And there will be fewer events, and a number of events will become purely virtual events where you can host appointments, you can do education and training and development quite easily online. But the value that comes from connecting our industry face to face, building those relationships and that trust, and I think trust is a very important and significant word in our industry right now, then trade shows will play a significant part. If I can just, to also just add to that from an international perspective related to, positives coming out of this pandemic, which, I accept in our industry are really challenging to find, but they do exist. And, for many years, the UNWTO has measured tourism through tourism receipts and arrivals. WTTC has measured it through jobs and economic growth. But never have we as an industry properly measured tourism and its impact socially and environmentally. And with this new reset button, I think there is a very unique opportunity for our industry to embrace that very valuable opportunity to say, well, this is how our industry contributes socially. And when you look at the impact that the lack of travel has had positively and negatively on tourism, if as an industry we want to be taken seriously by governments across the world, then making that new step would be a very significant change maker in my view.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dame Fiona. It's wonderful to hear, and we hope you're all keeping well in London. We are following events from Kenya. It's wonderful how one thing happens in one corner of the world and we all feel it with you. So we are in this together. And in a moment, we get into our question and answer discussions. And I will be addressing some of the questions that have come through from participants of this afternoon's webinar to our panelists. I'd like to once again thank everybody for joining us and for sending those questions as instructed earlier. And the link for this afternoon's webinar is going to be available to all those who have attended. Questions on the same as well will be made available to all of our panelists and those who are attending this webinar. So I will go straight to our first question. And this is a question from Julian Asher, and it's a question directed towards the PS, and it's international clients who'd like to include multiple countries in their itineraries when they travel. For example, a safari in Kenya with gorilla trekking in Rwanda or Uganda, are countries coordinating their post-corona strategies.
Thank you, Sheila. Yes, indeed, for the shared circuits is one of the things that the countries of East Africa, and specifically 3 of them, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, have been developing strategies of how to reopen shared circuits. And again, this will be pretty much determined by how prepared the destinations independently will be ready, and the perception of the traveler that they'll be safe when those destinations. So for example, now looking at our regional travelers and particularly those that are residents of these countries, we have been seeing many of them, at least about 42% of them have still have not canceled their travel, but they have rescheduled their travel. And the scheduling, again, with the understanding that they will be able to visit all these countries in a circuit that makes sense to them. So the protocols for this have been agreed at the ESC level, and we anticipate that they will also be applying even to the international traveler when international travel opens up. Thank you.
All right, one more question for you, Madam PS. One of the many issues that we hear are, and many of the participants in this afternoon's webinar have raised concern, national park fees. Will there be any movement making the cost lower for these fees to help encourage travel as we move forward?
Yes, indeed. And I think, of course, there are many other, can I say, cushion measures that the government is considering. One of them being lowering of park entry fees. The other being creation of a credit scheme for, particularly for the MSCs in the tourism industry. But all these, we will be able to divide them in due course, because we need to make the issues that we need to agree together in government. We make proposals as the Minister of Tourism. Then we discuss this with our colleagues at Treasury. But by and large, there is growing consensus that we will be able to lower park entry fees come July. So that, and also the same going to visa entry fees and the credit scheme for, particularly to support the MSCs in the industry. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam PS. The next question is for Dr. Radier. And the question is, how are tourism boards going to support their local industries following the current decline in international tourism? We know a lot of restaurants, destinations are closed. Where are we going to find the money? How are you dealing with that?
Okay, so tourism boards are about creating demand, because the mandate is around marketing. So because we have mentioned that our latent market will be domestic, the onus is on us as a tourism board to build that capacity for people, when you say our local industries, our local artists, our craftsmen, to be able to build them, to develop what we already have within a strategy that we started working on called Top Experiences. Mm-hmm. And what this does is you begin to create experiences within communities that people haven't hitherto considered something that is export ready. And the way you build capacity around creating these experiences is to build a story for that experience, or for that skill, or for that offering that is either within the community, and they can sit in areas of heritage, they can sit in areas of craft, they can sit in areas of just culture, they can sit in areas of history, and all of these are the areas that we have not considered hitherto. And what that does is you immediately create an opportunity, even for a small community that has probably a unique say experience within their culture and heritage that nobody has looked at. This is the time for us to look at this diversity around our country and see how do we build them as real experiences that people can experience within their locality, and also as one of the offerings that will give us that competitive edge as we move into the new normal. Because people want to be able to have experiences where they don't have lots of people, as is driven by the fact that that's the experience that people associate with that destination. So those are some of the things that we will be able to do. Remember, we must create the demand to be able to drive revenue and open up income to those communities, because we don't have the capacity to create stimulus packages as a tourism board for specific communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Just going back to your presentation earlier this afternoon, you did make mention and stress on the importance of the domestic traveler. And there's a follow-up question to that. This one came from Greg Monsoon. And Greg asked, what percentage of our tourism industry is made up of domestic travelers with a focus on the domestic market, those who will also be strapped for cash financially? How much impact will this have on overall numbers in our market?
Okay, that's the question that is the gray area. You know how we are not looking in the rear view mirror because everything has changed. The domestic market is now 100% because it is the market that we're opening up with. What we must do is be able to leverage that 100% to be able to build the value around the already established products that we call signature experiences that the destination offers, but also to develop, as I mentioned, other experiences that begin to unlock the value that you're able to get from your domestic market. Having said that, in the past, we've had domestic contribute up to 54% of travelers in and around the region. The question that we need to now ask ourselves is the value worth it? And because this is the market that we have, the onus is on us to make that market meet that value that we're looking for. Yes, there's the understanding that people are coming out of a difficult time, and what we must be is patient and have the tenacity to say that we will work through this, even if it is 6 months out when people are ready to begin to consume what you're offering. But we must prepare for it. And this is not going to be a one-time wonder because COVID has been here. So now suddenly we focus on domestic. This must be the way that the industry and the way that the new normal moves forward. This becomes a core focus for most destinations as we move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Radir. Truly grateful for those insights and for answering that question. Thank you, Greg, for sharing it with us. Jacinta Nzioka has also posted a question, and this question will be addressed to you, the CEO of Kenya Airways, Alan. The question is, thank you for those IATA perspectives. Are there any indications when these protocols that you mentioned are going to be put together in order to ably have an indication of how viable international markets will be, especially for business travelers focusing on associations, corporates, and incentive travel?
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. The answer is that, you know, as IATA, we are an association of airlines. So our work is to lobby. We are not a regulator. Of course, we are not government as well. So our work is to lobby. So the consensus across airlines is that we will lobby for the standardization, and like I said, of the protocol. And I know that today we sent out our note out to our position as IATA into the press, and to try and agitate for standardization. Unfortunately, we still have, of course, about 78 different countries who want to do things in a different way. So the long and short answer is we don't know. We will not the ones who are going to implement the standardized protocol, but we'll agitate and lobby because it's important. Remember, we are an ecosystem that needs to depend on each other. So as soon as I get more information, I can pass it on to the trade.
All right, Alan, there's one more question for you. And this one's from Ingrid Nyatichi. And Ingrid asks, how is Kenya as a country positioning itself to grow domestic demand? For example, flights are very expensive. The second part of her question is improving infrastructure. Roads to the Mara are not necessarily very great. And finally, how will we boost intra and regional travel post-corona with our neighboring countries? I think this is a question that Nick can share, so you can have the first half of answering that question, and then Nick can finalize with the final sections of that question from Ingrid.
Yeah, particularly around the roads.
Yeah.
I will not be able to respond to the road issue.
Yes.
But definitely, listen, I mean, cost of travel is high, agreed. What we need then to look at is what is the composition of that cost. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of that is the taxes and levies. And one of the things she spoke very rightly about domestic collaborating with neighboring countries. One way of lowering the costs of particularly regional travel is domesticating that regional travel. Just like we talk about customs. So in terms of travel, we push for domestication of travel so that it reduces taxes from $50 per trip to $6 per trip. That alone, goes a long way in helping to reduce the cost of travel. But of course, it's true that we need to do two other things. One, in the new world, as airlines, we have to collaborate. And that's the one thing I'm saying. Collaborate across different airlines, different countries. That way, we get synergies. That way, we can be able to reduce costs. Then we need to look internally as airlines as well and see how we can be more efficient. And we're asking ourselves very hard questions on how can we reduce our cost base and therefore operate more efficiently. And a lot of the things that we're discussing today, actually, we are responding to already. How do you become more digital, for example, which has an impact actually on travel agents. And I know they're on this call, so they should know that there's going to be an impact in terms of integration between airlines, travel agents, and tour operators. All these things we need to ask ourselves in the industry, how are we going to operate differently to be more efficient and so to offer a more compelling product to the market.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Nick, the second half of Ingrid's question, we'd like you to give us your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Sheila. With regards to roads, the beauty of it is that Kenya as a country, we have been working towards improving our road infrastructure. The challenge would be now, as you are moving within the region, what protocols do you have in place? Because it is the protocols that each state puts in place that will ease the travel. Currently, we are trying to deal with truck drivers as an example. And you can see it has been a bit of a challenge, trying to see, do we test? How often do we test? And that may extend to regional travel by road. What protocols do we put in place? Do we test everyone in a vehicle? And if so, how easy would it be to have people seated somewhere waiting for results for a couple of hours? There are many things that we need to think about and agree on as a region to enable domestic and regional tourism to thrive initially.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mohammed Hersey had a question for Dr. Radir, and this concerned virtual tourism and live cam coverage to Magical Kenya. How are we going to make that top of mind? Dr. Radir, I throw that one to you.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Mohammed. This is one of the areas that I may not have articulated in the discussion, but I talked about captive audiences waiting for destinations to captivate them, so to speak. And live stream is one of the ways that we will begin to demonstrate what it is that we have in the destination. This is not in the future. This is something that is in place and is about to take off. We started off with embracing what our trade is doing, but the thing around live streaming is it has to be an ongoing process. We will partner with our trade and have already started to do that, but we have also commissioned specific live streaming project that will allow us to actually footprint the experiences and the diversity around the region. So like I said, the partnership with our trade to be able to ensure that we are ready in recovery is paramount to making things like these successful. So indeed, Mohammed, we completely embrace it. We're on the same page with that, and that is what we can do. I say tourism starts now, and it's virtual.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Radir. As we talk about the virtual tourism and being able to visit the parks virtually. The next question that I pose goes to Charles, and it's a question that's come from Jacinta Nzioka. And she asks, how can businesses make virtual tourism a going concern? How do you monetize virtual tours, virtual events, as we settle in this period where we face, where we have our Zoom meetings and so on and so forth? How do we monetize this new venture?
Thanks, Sheila, and thanks, Jacinta, for that question. I've also seen some comments regarding the fact that virtual tourism cannot replace actual human contact, and that's absolutely right. And I don't think that it is meant to replace the human contact or the people going from one place to another. However, what it does is really entice and get people to really emotionally connect with those places that they want to go to, which is an absolute critical thing. I'll pose this point. Historically, people used to listen to a lot of radio, and then television came into the mix. And everyone said that TV will kill radio. But the reality of it is that neither happened. What happened is that people love pictures, and the human mind is really motivated and energized by the visual aspect of it all. And that's what virtual reality and images are going to do for tourism going forward, in terms of being able to appeal to more people to go to more places. And to your question about going concern, there are many ways that you can be able to do that. Canada, for instance, Visit Canada has done a phenomenal job on their YouTube channel, whereby they curate and create a lot of really fantastic content. And as part of that, ads are served against that content. And when ads are served against that content on YouTube, the person who owns that content actually gets a share of that revenue. And it is a majority of the revenue that goes to that person who owns the content. So there are many ways that you can be able to do that. Another way that you can be able to make it a going concern is by creating virtual visits, which you then charge for people to experience. And that's something that we've seen in different ways. So almost like visit a particular place and get a virtual tour, but instead of paying a little bit of money, instead of just watching it for free, you actually pay micro payments to actually get people to watch that. And that is something that you can actually do right now, because from a wellness perspective, and many psychologists have been able to authenticate this fact, is that a lot of people are really stressed about staying indoors during this shutdown and lockdown periods in most parts of the world. What they're seeking to do is to try and escape. And for YouTube, for instance, we've seen a massive growth in terms of the amount of content that is being watched online. I do have a statistic here which I wanted to share, which is 22%. We've seen a 22% increase in inspirational queries on YouTube specifically, and a 30% in searches around theme park videos on YouTube specifically over the last 2 weeks. What that tells me is that people are hungry to go out and experience something, even though it's virtually. Because even though people are locked in, they want to go out in some way, shape, or form. And so there are many ways you can be able to monetize that, as I stated, but I really want to emphasize the point that virtual tourism is not a substitute for going to a particular place. It complements what you're already doing when people are out. And as most panelists have said, right now, nobody can go anywhere. So I think people should really leverage the time people are at home to actually go out and visit. And people are spending a lot of time online. I'll give you two other statistics. BT in the UK has seen a 2x increase in the amount of bandwidth that's being consumed in the UK. And just here at home, Safaricom has seen a 3x increase in the amount of bandwidth being consumed here at home. And so really these things are things that we cannot negate. Digital is here to stay. If there's one benefit around COVID, is the fact that it has accelerated digitization going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question that I'd like to share with Dr. Radir. It's just come in from Sandhya Pochiraju. And Sandhya asks, Magical Kenya on social media still has a majority of posts showcasing wildlife. Will this strategy be revamped in the future to publicize other sectors of tourism? To publicize other sectors of tourism, such as cultural tourism and agriculture.
Thank you, Sandhya, and thank you, Sheila. As I mentioned, what we must accept is we must augment what we have, not throw the baby with the bathwater. Wildlife and beach are our staple products. Those will continue to be our staple products. The question is, how do we package them differently? So there's those experiences that are synonymous with our destination, which we must continue to find new ways of showcasing these. But Sandhya's quite right, and I alluded to it earlier. When you want to create competitiveness, you want people to relook, take a double take on what they thought they knew. And opportunities and other offerings that the destination has come into play. We begin to leverage things like the fact that we are one of the leading markets, say in cut flowers, for example. We talk about our art and our culture. We talk about our heritage. We're a country that has almost 47 tribes. We want to talk about that culture, that heritage. There's the issue around each region that we have in Kenya having something unique about their food, or the way that they prepare their food, or something around their culture. All of this comes into play because you must seem to have a basket that is also attractive and is different, because as has been mentioned by the panelists, if people just think, I'm going to go to the safari and beach, and the mindset is that it comes a certain way, then you might lose people who are looking for something that they feel will make them feel a lot more comfortable, because there's some moderation in terms of the consumption of that experience. So indeed, we will be looking, and in the near future, this is basically the COVID and the pre-recovery period, to showcasing other things and other diversity that the destination has to offer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Radier. Our final question, this one goes to Madam PS. It's a question from Robert Cullins, and Robert asks, it would be important to know what the government of Kenya has in plan for how the tourism industry will survive in the next 6 to 12 months. With all our overheads, how is this going to be? Is there any financial assistance that the government has in plan? I can foresee a situation where thousands of employees will be laid off in the next few months.
Thank you, Sheila, for that question, and thank you to the one who asked. One of the things that we've been doing with the ministry is to work with the industry through its associations to develop mechanisms of, one, keeping people in jobs. And I think the moment COVID-19 hit us, as Kenya had, one of the things that we did was to convene the sector and to get a confirmation, a commitment from them that they'll do everything that is in their power to keep people in the job. However, I said earlier that one of the things that we have been pursuing, and there seems to be some light, is the tourism recovery credit scheme. That is supposed to, it's a long-term scheme with 1-digit interest, so that people can be able to get working capital. People can have cash flows released. And other things that we're also pursuing are can we get tax deferments so that people can pay later when things are better, and use the tax that they would have paid to government to inject into their businesses as cash flows. But going by and large, I think this is a concerted effort. The industry and government have to work together. And that is why for us, our open door policy is one that we want to echo over and over again, that we want to dialogue. We are now developing protocols with the hotels and eateries for the opening of the gradual opening of these facilities, because we know that these are easier eateries are easier to rebound. Hotels are next in line, and we want to develop these protocols together with the industry. Also, because our industry, our focus now is on domestic and regional, we are looking at some of the measures that as government we have taken that were self-inflicting. And therefore, we are looking at how we can also raise and discuss with our peers who would have had probably challenges with some of the products that we are promoting, to just confirm to them that these are fresh products, they are safe products. A case in mind is destination wedding, the weddings that we normally host for the region. So we are looking at opening more and more products, more and more attractions, but as well as easing the burden on the industry on credit, and also opening up cash flows. We are looking for all ways and means possible to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, PS. We'd like to acknowledge and recognize the Cabinet Secretary from the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife, Najib Balala. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. We understand your heavy schedule and we understand why you weren't able to be here with us, but have certainly made the time to pop in and keep abreast on what has been happening in our chats this afternoon. Madam PS, as we close, this is indeed a time for renewal. It is time for all of us to think about the way forward. And I'd now like to give you the floor for the closing remarks and the way forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you so much to all the participants for all those insightful questions and comments that you've been bringing forth. One is that our new normal is now. It's not tomorrow. We are already in our new normal. We as a country are known for our resilience. We are a country that is known for talent. We are a country of champions, and we want to live with that spirit to propel us forward. So what we envisage as our way forward is that continued engagement with the industry to reconsider our markets, particularly those that are not traditionally performing markets. Now we want to venture into those ones as virgin markets. We want to also look at products, making people aware of the products that do not really depend on volumes, because those are safer in the times of health concerns like now. We are also looking at this period as a time of rejuvenation. We are rejuvenating ourselves. Our attractions and experience are mainly natural resource based, and this is the time we have seen a lot of rejuvenation in our wildlife, in our flora and fauna. We have seen our beaches getting more beautiful by the day, but we are saying it is time for us to reset and rethink. And as government and the industry come together on the same table to do this, then our future is brighter. We cannot do it alone as government, and that's why we are going to have more and more of this series of engagements with you and with experts so that we can get more insights on the future of tourism. I thank you very much, and I really thank you also, Sheila, for the moderation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam PS, and thank you to all our panelists one more time. Thank you for the insights you've shared. Remember, this webinar has been recorded and it will be uploaded on the Magical Kenya YouTube channel. Thank you very much to all our participants from Kenya and across the globe. Thank you for all the questions, and we look forward to catching up with you again in the next webinar. Do have a lovely evening. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.